In 2025, I got the full splits, and I'm only 3 centimeters away from my chest touching the ground in the pancake pose. And I'm going to tell you exactly how I'd get flexible in 2026. Or I guess more accurately, I'm going to tell you exactly how I'm going to get flexible in some poses that I've never worked on before where I'm still a beginner. So hopefully this will help you make some progress on your flexibility this year. The first thing I do to get flexible in 2026 is to commit for the whole year. That's right, not just for 1 month, not just for 1 week, but the entire year. And the reason for this is very simple. I'm sure you've encountered these 30-day stretching challenges that appear every January. Maybe you've just finished one yourself. I have friends and family who have tried these types of stretching or yoga challenges, and you know what? After the 30 days, whether they completed it or not one of them actually kept up the habit for life. And so years later, not one of them is actually flexible. They have nothing to show for the time they put into it. And that's just my experience. I'm sure it does work for some people, but ultimately it brings us to a fundamental problem of the idea of trying to do something for 30 days. And when you take a moment to think about it, the problem with the 30-day challenge is pretty obvious. 1 month is fuck all. 30 days of work will not change you significantly physically. It just won't. Have you ever run into an old friend from high school that you hadn't seen in years, and you run up to him and you say, "Oh man, like this guy's looking really, really good. I wonder what he did." And you ask him, "Hey, how'd you get so fit? What's your secret?" And he turns to you and he says, "Well, back in January of 2022, I decided to start lifting weights for 30 days with no rest days, and that was the secret. Now I'm jacked." No, because it doesn't really work like that. Have you ever met someone who is like decent at guitar and you ask them how they got started and they started by a 30-day challenge? Probably also no. I mean, there might be exceptions to this, but the general truth that I'm talking about here is that you can't just do something for 30 days and expect to be immediately transformed. You can't become unrecognizable in 30 days. You just can't. So what does it take to actually get life-changing results? It takes consistent effort over time. It doesn't have to be a huge amount of effort, but it does have to be applied consistently over the long term, over the period of time that you want to enjoy those results for. And so in order to get flexible, we want to have a sustainable practice. And how do we actually go about building a sustainable practice? Well, one of the ways you can do that is to just make it pretty easy. If your sessions are easy to complete, easy to fit into your life schedule, and easy to motivate yourself for, you're going to be able to actually do them. So I really don't like to think of starting a new habit as like a challenge, especially not a 30-day challenge with 0 breaks. If you think about what you want your practice to look like a year from now, is it going to be every single day with no breaks? Well, if the answer to that question is no, then why would you start off with a harder version of it? It just doesn't make any sense. I think it makes more sense to start off with something that's as easy as possible while still working. So if you realize that long-term progress is actually what you're after, it makes sense to commit to working for the long term. If we fast forward to the end of 2026, if you've completed 100 stretching sessions, which is an average of about 2 a week, you will be drastically more flexible than the person who completes 30 stretching sessions in January and then does nothing else. And it turns out that it's way easier to stretch twice a week than it is to complete that 30-day challenge in the first place. So start with something that's actually small enough to be achievable and small enough that you might still be doing it a year from now. So commit for a whole year and then commit for life. The second way I'd make sure I'm getting flexible in 2026 is to just start by committing to one goal. Now, watching this, you may have many flexibility goals. Maybe you want to improve your shoulder flexibility. Maybe you want to get the pike stretch. Maybe you want to get the splits. Maybe you have plenty of goals, and that's all great, but you have your entire lifetime to pursue all of those goals. The problem with trying to work on everything at once is that while you will make a bit of progress in everything at once, the progress will be slower than it would be if you just focused on one thing. And because flexibility actually builds relatively slowly, it becomes very, very hard to see the progress and to measure that progress on a weekly basis. And if you can't regularly measure your progress, it'll be very hard to motivate yourself to do the sessions because you won't be 100% sure that it's working. So I think most of you will find it's better to make undeniable, visible progress for a period of like 3 months and then switch your focus and pivot to working on something else. So I'm 35 now, but back in my late 20s, I did 1 year of yoga at a studio. And during that year, most weeks I did roughly three 90-minute full body yoga sessions. And to be fair, I did gain some general flexibility. Absolutely. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm just saying that the dosage required in order to get generally flexible was enormous. It was over 4.5 hours a week. And I never got extremely deep in any one pose. I never got a good splits. I never got really good back bends because we'd spend actually so little time working on any individual one. So if you love yoga, that's great. There are many benefits of a holistic practice like yoga. But if you're just trying yoga in order to get flexible, you can take a shortcut. You don't need to do all the extra stuff. I think it makes more sense to just focus yourself on one specific goal and efficiently work towards that. So just choose one pose to start. What should you choose? Well, look at yourself, see what your weaknesses are and what your goals are. Is there a specific area of your body that holds you back in daily life or in sports? Well, maybe start there. I really like to focus my work on compound stretches in the same way that I focus my lifting work on compound exercises like squats, pull-ups, and dips. I like to focus my flexibility work on compound stretches like the splits, the pancake, the bridge, full body stretches that have a long propensity for progressive overload over time and that stretch a large portion of your body. My first goal was to get the front splits because it works the vast majority of the lower body in one simple pose, and it's really easy to load with just the weight of your body. And that's why I teach that in my online course, Finding Flexibility. The link is wherever links are. So the takeaway there is to just choose one pose, work on it 2 or 3 months to see substantial progress, and then pivot to another goal. The third thing I do to get flexible in 2026 is to stretch twice a week for about 5 minutes total. I've done a lot of experimenting with a lot of trial and error, and I think this is kind of the minimum dosage that seems to work for people. Once a week does still yield gains, but it becomes very, very hard to measure on a weekly basis. And so I wouldn't advise that for beginners. I think if you really want to build a flexibility practice that you can believe in and that you can make consistent progress for the long term, trying for at least twice a week is going to be the minimum. So the beauty of this is that it's easy enough to fit into anyone's schedule, even busy old you. And if you don't think you have time to invest in your body for 5 minutes twice a week, take a look at your phone screen usage time and think about that question. So I imagine that you probably do have 10 minutes that you could reallocate to something that's going to make your life better rather than doing whatever scrolling does. Put another way, the beauty of such a minimal program is that it's legitimately not a challenge. You can just get it done. You can hold yourself accountable, but it still gives you the flexibility to push back by a day or two whenever life gets busy, because life is gonna get busy. We're not trying to do a sprint with no compromises for a very short amount of time. We're trying to do a marathon over a very long period of time with as many compromises as you need, but still keeping some consistency. So you might be saying, John, okay, that's great. I need to stretch for 5 minutes, but what do I actually do? How do I stretch for 5 minutes that's going to be enough to actually get me more flexible? Well, here's a very simple way to do it. Set a timer for 5 minutes and practice going deep into that pose for 5 minutes. Over the 5 minutes, you want to gradually work up to like a 7 or 9 out of 10 intensity of the stretch feeling, but never pushing towards pain. If you feel pain, retreat immediately and take a few days off and then come back to it. But if you're honest with yourself and you really push to an 8 or 9 out of 10 intensity feeling on the stretch, it's going to feel pretty intense. Your muscles are going to be tired and you're going to be sweating. And I call this high intensity stretching. And throughout those 5 minutes, you're just resting as needed. So that could look like doing a warm-up set to like 5 or 6 out of 10, and then doing one pretty hard set to 7 to 9 out of 10. And doing that on both sides will take you about 5 minutes. Then you just recover for 2 to 3 days and do it again, trying to get a little bit deeper than last time. The fourth thing I do to guarantee flexibility progress in 2026 is to measure my progress weekly. First of all, this holds you accountable because if you're not progressing regularly, then you'd obviously need to change something. Something's not working. Second of all, this is actually part of what makes high intensity stretching effective because ultimately, in order to get flexibility gains, you really need to be pushing very close to your current max range of motion. Any amount of time spent stretching where you're actually very far off of your deepest pose is not going to be time well spent because it's not actually going to elicit flexibility gains. So by measuring regularly in your actual practice sessions, you make sure that the work you're actually doing is properly tuned. This is just like in weightlifting, where you want to know how much weight you're putting on the bar for each exercise so that you can see the progress over time, and so that you know objectively that you're actually working at the desired intensity. So very, very simply, you just measure your current limit of your range of motion and then try to work very, very near to that point over time. And obviously, you'll be able to push past that limit, and that will be a moving target as you train. The final thing I do to guarantee progress on flexibility in 2026 is adding some sort of feedback system to my training. So when I'm tracking my stretching sessions, I'm also taking tiny little notes on how the session felt, what little tweaks I tried, whether I felt something interesting in one of my hips or not, and all those minor little variables that I can tweak on a weekly basis. And I try to think about what worked and what didn't. And then I want to review these every so often. I like to do this roughly every 2 or 3 months. I read through my training notes, I look back on my objective progress during that period, and I just try to learn from it. What were the things that seemed to move the needle the most, and how can I do more of those next time? What were the things that didn't really work, or I struggled to actually keep doing and keep motivated for in my life, and try not to do those? Or I try to change something about the practice so they're not as much a part of it. And by doing this over time, we iterate our practice and we really make it our own. Because your flexibility practice should fit your body and your desires and your lifestyle. Flexibility should be flexible, right? Thank you guys very much for watching. Feel free to pop any questions in the comments and I'll try to respond to them in a future video. If you thought this video was valuable, do me a favor and share it with someone else who wants to get flexible in 2026. If you're serious about getting flexible once and for all yourself, you can access the first module of my flexibility course for free and the link in the description. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a great day.